Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly 90-minute deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
My name is Lisa. I'm a clinical psychologist and a college counselor. I am a parent of a boy in elementary school, a girl in middle school, and a girl in college. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University.
This week in the news, colleges want students to get a vaccine, but they are split on requiring a vaccine. An article in the Washington Post by 5 authors. Our bonus content is What Should I Do If My Child is in the 11th Grade? Our interview is with Kristen Mosley, a student who won 10 outside scholarships, telling us how she did it. That is part 2 of 3. And there'll be no college spotlight for this session.
Okay, friends, several announcements. First of all, boy, you know one thing I'd say, you have to be careful when you talk about the COVID virus and Corona, Dave, because your news gets old really, really fast. You know, remember a couple of weeks ago when I said, oh man, I guess I'm back to mask wearing, about 50 KN95 mask and everything. Now I look back at it and I was like, you know, you're so irresponsible. Like, of course I should wear a mask. One, it could save somebody's life. I mean, how big of a sacrifice is that for me to put a little cloth thing over my mouth at certain times to maybe save a life when we look at how deadly not only this particular variant is, but what's the other one, Dave? Lambda?
There is a Lambda variant coming in, and unfortunately Anthony Fauci is quite pessimistic going forward because he believes that it's almost inevitable that this thing will continue to mutate even beyond the efficacy of the current vaccine. So booster shots are going to be inevitable. It's only a matter of when.
Well, you know, I heard another, epidemiologist interviewed who's also an expert, and he's a real straight shooter. And he said, the reality is we're going to be dealing with this for the rest of our lives in some form. Like that's his opinion, and in the way that, the flu, I'm not comparing it to the flu, but that never ever completely leaves our lexicon, so.
Well, people forget that disease has been part of the human experience ever since the garden. I mean, the reality is that there was the Black Death, there was the plague, there was yellow fever, there was polio. Even after we had antibiotics, we've had seasonal flus and pandemics that have been quite deadly going back to 2019. People forget that we had the HIV epidemic. In the early 80s, there was 5 years where people knew nothing of what that was, and that was a horrible way to die. And we did not cure it, but we certainly have learned how to treat it. So I think our collective memory is short that disease is just part of the human experience. And what happens is there's never a normal. There's just new normals, and we just evolve to meet the challenges of the time. And this is one of the challenges of our time. And folks, unfortunately, even when we get over Corona, there will be another disease that we might need to deal with. And I told my daughter, you just have to deal with it.
Yeah, and I'm going to transition off that only because we're going to be talking a lot of Corona today. Our article is headquartered in that. So Let me get to some, but all points well stated, Dave. So second announcement, this is a big one, something I'm very excited about. I've mentioned this the last few weeks. So Apple Ruth will be administering ACT and SAT tests to your students, both on Saturday, August 21st. There'll be an ACT and an SAT, 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. And then again on the 28th, they'll flip the order and also have an ACT and an SAT. So you can sign up now. Just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com. Under the resources tab, you'll see a sign-up sheet. Now, one thing I will mention, you'll have a choice. At the very end of the test, when you check out and you go to pay, you're going to see 2 boxes. One that says pay $20 to have the test shipped to you, and another one that gives you the option to print out the test. Now, you should know if you opt to choose the printed out version, it's a lot of pages, like around 70 pages. So make sure you have a lot of ink in your printer. You can either request everything shipped to you, and it'll be $20 for them to ship all your materials to you to take the test, or you can download it and print it out. But this is not a test you take on the computer. They're simulating the real thing. So you'll have that choice when you sign up. The other thing that's exciting is there will be a follow-up session, and you'll see the details for that when you sign up as well. I think it's September 8th. That'll be fantastic. You'll have a detailed score report of how your child did. That's for students and parents. You'll have an expert there to answer all questions on the test. And that expert will be Dr. Jed Appleruth, the person I personally regard as the most knowledgeable person in the world on the ACT and the SAT. I think of him as the Mark Kantrowitz of the ACT and the SAT. In fact, I recommend you go back and listen to my interview with Jed on episodes 28 and 29 so you can see how well he knows these tests inside out. What I'm excited about this is it's great for a parent to do it at their home, but there's something about the formality of being in the group that sort of simulates the real thing as much as is possible in this corona world we're in. I'm also very excited about that follow-up session. That's going to be a 1-hour session from 8:30 to 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I think you're going to really enjoy that. You're going to learn a lot out of that. So this is great for anybody who wants to take an extra practice test to help prepare for the real test. It's also great if you're trying to figure out if you're an ACT or an SAT test taker. So we're trying to bring value to our listeners, and this is something I'm really confident will bring a lot of value. So just go to yourcollegebounkid.com, resources tab. You'll see the test and take it away. If you have any questions at all, shoot them to questions@yourcollegebounkid.com. All right, next announcement. I've got a few interviews coming up. I'm really excited about it. I'm reaching out to our listeners because I'm going to move to a little bit of a hybrid model. So I've done it where I ask all the questions. I've done it where you ask all the questions. Moving to a model where you'll ask some of the questions and I'll ask some of the questions. And so we're going to have 2 different interviews on athletic recruiting between the end of 2021 and the end of 2022 within that 12-month stint. And so we're asking if you have any questions at all on athletic recruiting, send them in. The interviews are going to be a little different. One's going to be with Justin Doty, Director of Admission at Trinity College, and he'll have his athletic director there. Another will be with Danny Keogh of NCSA. He does tons and tons of Facebook Lives for huge groups. He's a real expert on college admissions recruiting, and he's also coached before. He's just a real pro. He knows Division 1, 2, 3, NAIA, the whole thing. So if you've got any questions at all on athletic recruiting, it's a topic that in our 4 years, I don't feel we've really delved deeply into it. I did one chapter in my book that was a very detailed chapter, and we went really deep on that one episode. But other than that, we've touched it on some articles, but we've never really given you some serious meat and potatoes. And a lot of students either are considering varsity sports, or they know they want to do varsity sports, or they want to do club sports. And so ask your questions, students and parents. Just shoot them to questions@yourcollegebounkid.com. Finally, I want to give a real shout out to Keisha in Indiana. She's one of our most dedicated listeners. It's been so since we launched the podcast. And we were interacting, emailing each other back and forth. I asked her a question. Is there anything you think we could do in the podcast to make it better for listeners? She said, let me think about that and get back to you. So she got back with a great suggestion. She said, I love the question from the listener segment, and I love the in the news. But, you can only take one question at a time. Why don't you invite a financial aid expert in and ask them 6 or 8 questions? And so instead of one question from a listener, have a whole question segment where we can have a bunch of questions. And that's what we're going to do. I've already secured a commitment from a fantastic person I've known for a while, professional financial aid counselor at a college. And so it's just a matter of picking the date, doing the recording, and having you send your questions in. So what I want you to do is send your questions in, any questions at all that you have about the financial component of the process. And we'll do an interview. We'll just do question after question after question. So I'm really excited both about this athletic interview and the financial interview. So, all right, Dave, ready? Admissions tip.
Admissions tip, go for it.
So the admissions tip, this is for parents. There's some fantastic Facebook groups out there of specific colleges. Some of them are for prospective students. Some of them are for current parents, but you'll be able to join if you're a prospective. And it's just a fantastic way to learn the culture of a school, to hear the hot topics, the hot issues that are going on, to get the good, the bad, and the ugly, and to get beyond the marketing. And so I strongly want to encourage you as a parent to look into these type of Facebook groups for schools that are under serious consideration for your child. It can be a real good way to unearth the culture of the school, strengths, weaknesses, in a way that's darn near impossible to get off of reading materials and attending information sessions and going on tours. So that's the tip. All right, Dave. Admissions vernacular.
All right, let's hear it.
You know you got 2 strikes in a row, so you're the baseball player up to the plate. Will it be strike 3 or will you at least get a single?
Oh, I think I'll get a single. Go ahead.
Y essay.
Y essay. Is it an
What's
essay?
a Y essay?
Is it an essay on why you want to do something or why you want to go to college?
I can't give you credit for that, man, because all you're doing is taking the name and deducing. It is an essay on why you want to come to our school. And so, you know, and so sometimes people call them why us essays or why this school essay. But, you know, my colleague, she did admissions at Ohio State and Columbus State, and she always just calls it the Y essay. The school added a Y essay. She added a Y essay. So you get, it's a very, very, very common essay. Like, why do you want to come to our school? So while you were close.
I don't quite get it.
You don't quite get it. But guess what? You live another day. And there's always another chance because in this game, it's not 3 strikes and you get another bat at the plate next week.
That's right. It's 9 innings.
There you go, 9 innings. All right, our big number, as I promised last week, and to honor the fact that 5 million kids go to community college and 27% of all college students, and we quite honestly don't talk about it that much. I said I would do 3 big numbers in a row on community college, so this is the second of 3. And I'm giving 2 numbers, and they're not going to seem that big when I throw them out, but when I explain them, I think they will. The numbers are 19 and 16. You're thinking, Stuck, you've been throwing numbers out in the millions before. Now you're giving me 19 and 16?
That's right.
So here we go. Since the pandemic, Black students are down 19% at community college, and Latino or Hispanic students are down 16%. So when you put it in that context, that is a big number, Dave. I'm 1 in 5, basically, and 1 in 6. So that's a substantial number, and you can see why community colleges are hurting, because here's another number. Blacks and Latinos comprise 40% of all community college students.
Can I ask another follow-up question?
Sure.
Do you know what the overall college enrollment is for Blacks and Latinos? Has it fallen by that amount, or is this just specific to community colleges?
Well, you know what it does? It mirrors the trends we see nationally.
Right.
So what do we see nationally? You know, what we see nationally is that highly selective private colleges have not been hurting. They've got an increased applicant pool. What do we see with highly selective, flagship colleges? You know, your state universities, they've done extremely well. Only a few instances where they haven't, and they tend to be in places that are experiencing outmigration of population. And who is it that struggled? It's been the community colleges the most and the regional public. So those are national trends that it's no different for Black Latino students. So it's more consistent with the national trends.
Okay.
And for less selective, like really, you know, your least selective privates, because that's another bucket, right? You've got your highly selective, your moderately selective, and your flagships. You've got your community college, you've got your regional publics, and then you have your least selective privates. The least selective privates are also really struggling. So I would just say it's just completely correlated with what you've experienced at those schools. So it's more been a function of the schools the students are attending than a racial component. I'm not saying there's no racial component, but it's been marginal there. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
All right. So for our really attentive listeners, you know, I rolled out a new feature, but I said I'm only doing it on bonus content weeks, which is basically, you know, our bonus content is like, it'll be like 180, 185, 190, 195, right? I do that with Lisa. This week we're looking at what you should do if your child's in the 11th grade. And so it's bonus content, rant and rave. It's only my second one, Dave. Mark's rant, Mark's rave.
Okay.
You know, Mark's too generic. There were 5 Marks in my gym class, and so I'll go by my nickname, Stuck. Stuck's rant, Stuck's rave. So my rant is net price calculators. Now, this is a rant almost against everybody. So colleges say, oh, sure, don't worry about going ahead at early decision. Just do our net price calculator. And you can see what you're going to have to pay, and therefore you can be comfortable committing. And quite honestly, I even advise that with certain caveats. However, if colleges really, really want, they can go beyond that, and they can give a good faith estimate which is something beyond a net price calculator. It's where they review your financial paperwork to make sure you made no mistake. And they can come back and say, we've looked at everything, you've done it legitimately, and this is the number you could expect to pay. If this particularly applies to people who are looking at making an early decision and they don't want to jump off the cliff and commit to something not knowing what they're going to pay. Now, if you're full pay, then you know you pay the full price and this is not an issue for you. But if you're somebody for whom the cost of college is important, it's kind of nice to know what you're going to pay before you commit.
That's right.
And schools can do it. Franklin and Marshall in Lancaster, Pennsylvania has done this for years. Trinity University, I did the spotlight on in San Antonio, have done this for years. And so my challenge is for colleges to go beyond the net price calculator and to do the good faith estimate. It's called by a few different names, by the way. And the reason for that is because schools, they'll say do our net price calculator, but a lot of them at the end of the day won't stand by it if there's disparity between what it says and what your actual aid award is. Then they'll come back and say, oh, well, they're great, but they're not perfect. And so I'm challenging colleges to step up their game and go to the good faith estimate where they review your paperwork and then tell you this is what you could expect to pay. Fair?
That sounds fair.
And I'm going to do something a little creative for the rave. I'm going to hold off on it because there's something in our article we're going to discuss that is my rave. And when I get to it, I'll mention it then in the context of our article. So take it away, my friend.
Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
Okay. Colleges want students to get a coronavirus vaccine, but they are split on requiring the shots. And the subtitle is Colleges and Universities Face Logistics and Political Challenges as they try to create safe campus spaces for group living and learning. So the heart of this article is basically that there seems to be a political and geographic split on how colleges want to address the whole vaccinations and the coronavirus pandemic going forward. It's highlighted by Indiana University, that's going to require all 100,000 of its students and employees to get vaccinated, a vaccine mandate, as you will. However, other universities, such as Purdue, which is also in Indiana, are strongly encouraging the vaccine, but they are avoiding a mandate. And we see that the universities mandating vaccines are mostly on the East Coast. If you look at Purdue, they are using a system where they are using incentives. For example, students who document their coronavirus status by July 15th will be eligible for a $9,992 prize. And why that strange number? That represents a year of in-state tuition. Indiana went through some controversy. It actually asked that all of its students and staff attest that they have been vaccinated. But they did have exemptions for medical and religious reasons. However, recently, several students filed a federal lawsuit against Indiana University, arguing that the mandate violated their constitutional rights and state law banning vaccine programs. Indiana did back off, saying that you didn't have to download proof of your vaccination status, just had to attest, but they thought that the court ruling still favored them in their pursuit of requiring as many students as possible as to be vaccinated. And this highlighted what's going on nationally, that in the vast majority of blue states, vaccine mandates are not only allowed by the governors, but are increasingly pushed by the schools. But in the red states, as you will, there's increasing pushback. And they highlighted 3 states in particular, Texas, Georgia, and Arizona, all who have governors who have actually passed laws against requiring vaccine mandates. So I'm going to stop there, Mark, and open it up to discussion and see where you want to take it.
Thanks, Dave. Great overview. As always, you deliver 100% of the time. And guess what?
Yeah.
You're not low energy Jeb, man. Last week we got off the podcast. I said, Dave, what was up with that, man? You were flat as a pancake. and you can explain what's going on, Dave. You had a lot going on last week, so you were just tired.
Lots of rehabs, but we did it.
Yeah. You're back to your normal self. I love the energy.
Good.
So You know, Dave, we come on here and in our In the News segment, we try to talk about something related to college admissions, college in general that's in the news. And there've certainly been times, there's times we've declared emergency episodes and we've done an audible, and what we announced before, we did a complete 180 because something broke, like the Rick Singer scandal, for example, was one, or even when U Chicago announced they were test optional. We thought that was a pretty significant breakthrough. And there have been others, maybe about 4 or 5 times we've had an emergency in the news. But there's never been a time ever where our topic is as cutting edge, in my opinion, in the 185 episodes we've done, as apropos as this. And so Dave and I were recording right now at 7 a.m. Central time. And I got up at 5:30 a.m. Central time to review my notes and had CNBC on in the background. And I kid you not, for 1.5 hours, literally, this was the only topic in it. Should companies mandate vaccines, or should it have some type of optional program? And so first they were talking about CNN, which just implemented a vaccine mandate for all employees, and they fired 3 employees who violated it. So that was the talk. Then they started talking about de Blasio and the strict measures he's put in place in New York. And then they talked about U.S. Airlines. This literally just broke just like 10 minutes before we.
Yes.
Or United Airlines. Yeah. Dave is always on the news, man. He's on cutting edge, man. I'll tell you. United Airlines, this literally just broke. They just implemented the first airlines to implement a requirement that all of their employees, which is like 67,000 domestic employees and over 70,000 when you count international, and be vaccinated. And on Sunday, the esteemed Dr. Fauci called on companies and colleges to implement mandatory vaccination. And so this is the topic right now in corporations, in companies, in schools. And there's 2 different approaches that I respect. And they're symbolized by a couple different people. And so I'll read them. And so the first one comes from Guy Nicolette, and he's the assistant vice chancellor for the University Health at UC Berkeley. And he pointed out that the school, and this is to me really powerful, he says, like Nationwide, here's what he says in the article, has long required vaccination against diseases such as the measles, the mumps, and rubella. And then he says, if you look at the statistics, it's staggering how well a mandate works on a college campus. And I was looking at an interview on TV about this, Dave, and the epidemiologist making the same point. And he said, who's even heard of rubella besides you, probably, Dave? The fact that we haven't even heard of it shows how successful and effective it's been, and there's been no blowback. And that speaks to the politicization of this topic. But the point is, look how effective it is. Where's the resistance? You can't go to school. In so many cases, you can't even go to a summer camp unless you can prove you've been vaccinated against measles, mumps, and rubella. So that approach I respect, and I respect it highly. Now, second is Cal State. Now, mind you, this article came out in early July, and Cal State had a reversal of their position on July 27th. But as of the time of this article, Cal State, the largest 4-year system in the country, almost 500,000 students, they basically want to implement a vaccine mandate, but they are waiting for full approval from the FDA. Here's a quote. We decided this was the best approach, said Joseph Castro, the system's chancellor. If the FDA doesn't act before classes resume, we'll develop a plan. So there's been this, what's it, Dave? What's the term? Emergency? What's under an emergency? Go explain it.
You mean under the emergency authorization?
Yeah, so there's been an emergency authorization of these vaccines, but I guess not the official one, which probably comes with a little bit more research, right?
The emergency authorization basically means that you skip some bureaucratic regulatory steps in order to get the final authorization, but it does not refer to the safety or the efficacy of the vaccine. It's gone through all the necessary steps scientifically to prove that it's safe. It just needs to go through the official certification and licensing. So people have been tripped up on that term, thinking it reflected the safety of the vaccine. It's not. It's just it hasn't gone through all the bureaucratic hurdles to get officially certified.
Well, you know what? I'm glad you clarified that. So you know what? I don't have that much respect for that approach then. I respect the first approach. I'm sorry.
Yes.
You know, people get vaccinated for measles and rubella and mumps. You can be vaccinated. Now, here's what I will say. And this time for my rave, the article goes into the political tension that exists when you have a governor like DeSantis. Sorry, that knucklehead is trying to be Trump. I'm sorry. I really don't have a lot of respect for that guy. I'm sorry. But stuff he's doing down in Florida, Kemp's not much better in Georgia, just has a different personality. And then don't even throw in the guy in Texas. What another clown.
Abbott.
The stuff that they're doing and how hard it is when you're a school in that environment. And then it also mentions Tennessee, which is, been very, very conservative and been very anti-vaccine in a lot of different ways. And my rave is for Rhodes College because, when you're in a state and your governor and the state officials have a very sort of either overt anti-vaccine sentiment or it's tacit, but it's clear, then you're swimming upstream. I thought of this example, Dave. It would be like you're a kid and you want to go to some summer beach house with your friends. And one parent's like, yeah, let Johnny go. That'll be a great experience. And then another parent's like, no, we don't know these family. We don't know who's going to be there. We don't know who your kid's going to be around. You're not going. And you're the kid and you're hearing this argument between the parents. Well, you know what? A divided house doesn't stand. And you can probably exploit that and take advantage of it. A skilled kid knows how to play one parent against another. And so that's the scenario that a lot of these schools are when they're bucking upstream with the political leadership. So it takes a lot of coneys and a lot of courage to really buck upstream. And my rave is for Rhodes College for being very creative. So basically, they're in a state that's very sort of anti-mandatory vaccine, and they've come up with a policy that says, okay, you're not going to take the vaccine. You're going to pay $1,500 in fees to cover our expenses, and we're going to test you constantly. And I respect that because I know that took a lot of political courage. So my shout out is to Rhodes College. So I have a few other things that I want to say, Dave, but I want to just see what's percolating in your mind, and then I'll come back with my final thoughts.
Well, I just had a list of all the vaccines that we cover right now. Tetanus. Everybody had a tetanus. If you get a cut, you get a tetanus. Measles, mumps, rubella, that's standard. People don't actually realize now that almost all kids are vaccinated for HPV. In fact, we do it when they're 12, 13, 14 years old, and that's hugely cut down on cervical cancer and throat cancer. Meningitis is a huge one. All military recruits and most college kids, because we know that meningitis hits young kids in social settings. Hepatitis B, that's also one that's now become a routine for vaccination. If you travel, you're going to get hepatitis A vaccinations, yellow fever, and then you're going to take anti-malarial pills. So my question to all the anti-vaxxers is, are you going to be consistent? If you are going to oppose COVID vaccination, are you then going to not get vaccinated for tetanus, MMR, meningitis, HPV, hepatitis B, yellow fever, hepatitis A? More importantly, as I told one of my friends who called me up about his son because he had a strep throat and they wanted antibiotics, but they had not been vaccinated. You got to be scientifically consistent. If you feel that the COVID vaccine is so threatening to your health, why would you take antibiotics like penicillin? Ever looked at the side effect profile of typical antibiotics? Far more likely to kill you than the vaccine. So, to me, this is just people being politically obstinate. There is no science between anti-vaxxers. And the fact is, if you have a group of kids coming together, we've had vaccine mandates in for decades. Most people don't realize that you couldn't go to a public school without having a vaccination card showing that your child has had the basic vaccinations. So there is nothing different about COVID than what we've done going all the way back to the polio vaccine. And what we're just seeing here is people feeling, just because of the recent state of our politics, that they just want to not respect the right of other people to operate in a safe environment because of their political obstinacy. It's just that simple.
Dave, you woke up out of your coma and you brought A++. You brought the heat today, man. I just had to just shut up and let you do your thing. That was the perfect intersection of all your doctor knowledge with your college admissions perspective. That was great, man. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Good stuff. I wouldn't have known all those different things you listed. So no, I think that was like, case closed. What you guys don't know is that Dave finished 6th in the whole state of Ontario, which is a pretty big state, in debate in high school. And so he still has those debate tendencies in him. He brings them out every now and then, like there.
Well, I think my daughter brings them out because all the time she's trying to get me more woke.
There you go. I'm going to say something about that in a second. That's actually a good, you know what? Tell you the truth, that's like a perfect segue to a point I wanted to make. So let me do that. So one of the things that this article brings out, and this is a very, very difficult conversation I want to sort of embark on because it's just fraught with so much nuance that it's hard to get right. And what I want to mention is, so you see the politics of Tennessees and the Texases and the Floridas and the Georgias. And as somebody who's looking at schools, the question is, should the politics of the state impact your ability to look at a school? And it's a difficult question because in one sense, your politics are your values. So anything values related is fair game to consider when you're trying to find compatibility and you're looking at a school. But on the other hand, it's tricky, and I'll tell you why. So, Dave and I were always talking politics. We're in a group chat with Dave, his wife Frida, my brother Norm, and Dave's daughter, who's really a Politico. We're always talking politics in there. And, Dave and I agree a lot of times. He's more conservative than me, so every once in a while I go off on him, Once I went off on him and I said, we need to start a new podcast, Stucker and Tucker. Remember that?
Tucker. That's right.
And guess who Tucker was? It wasn't me. But I was halfway joking.
Crazy guy who's hanging out.
Crazy guy hungry.
Victor Orban. we won't go there. Let's stay focused.
Yeah. But that was like a one-liner that was kind of too good to resist and gave our group a laugh. But reality, I say, okay, Stucker and Manchin. I'll call you Manchin. So Dave and I, we don't always agree, but we have great conversations. And interesting, the reason I'm saying this, overall, I'm pretty liberal. But you know what? My daughter's a lot more liberal than I am. And Dave, your daughter's a lot more liberal than you are.
Oh, Lordy, yes.
What is Dave going to do?
That's right.
Yale's got to her. Now he's struggling.
I stop adding letters to the alphabet. No, keep going.
But this is why I'm going here. They say you shouldn't talk about politics, and we are. But we pride ourselves on not avoiding any topic on this podcast. But here's where I'm going with this. So you could easily say, look at this crazy Georgia. You got Marjorie Taylor Greene. You got Kemp. You got all this stuff going on. Like, if that's not your politics, like, why would I want to be in that environment? That would be a very easy statement to make. But I can tell you, my liberal daughter, she never had a single professor at the University of Georgia that did not have a liberal perspective. Not one. I mean, people would come to class, professors would come to class and say things like, if you're not for the Me Too movement or you're not for Black Lives Matter, I'm telling you right now, you're going to have a problem with me because this is the books I've written. This is my perspective. And so it's a very tricky question because I was having a conversation with another parent this week, and they lean a little liberal in their politics, and they were looking at some of the perspectives around a particular Alabama school, and they were like, they're too anti-mask there. So in some cases, the politics can impact the culture of the school, and in some cases, it can't. And so it's just a very, very tricky thing to assess. On one side, you could say, look, it's a huge school. You can pick a number of different professors, and you can find professors that that you're comfortable with. Now, listen, I'm not advocating that you only take people that hold your belief system. Part of education is having your belief system challenged. I certainly don't want everybody to think I'm advocating for monolithic thinking. But part of picking a school is finding your tribe and finding something that, somewhat remotely at least is in alignment with your value system. And so do you look at it like, for example, you look at a place like Georgia and you say, look at that crazy governor if you don't believe in what he's advocating for. Look at Marjorie Taylor Greene if you don't believe in what she's advocating for, which I hope you don't. But then you could say, okay, Well, Clark County, where Athens is located, is 75% Democratic. Do you look at the county, or do you look at it down to the professor level? I mean, even conservative state as Alabama is, around Auburn, which is a town, and Tuscaloosa, where Alabama is, they went blue. Only parts of the state that did. So it's just a very, very tricky thing to assess. Dave, what are your thoughts?
I'm frustrated because the whole vaccination should be apolitical. There's no politics involved in public health.
I know.
You know, there just is not. Look, the bottom line is, if I employ you and I have to pay your benefits and you get sick, I lose an employee. Not only does it impact the health cost and structure of the company, but I no longer have someone doing a vital part of my company, and it could be indefinite. You could even die. That's why you get a vaccine. There's no Democrat, Republican to it. If you're a student going to college, and my daughter has this concern, you want to have the fullest college experience. You want to be able to enjoy football games, have the professors in class. You want healthy classmates. If a portion of your classmates are not vaccinated, 10, 20, 30%, that portion then can become sick, drop out of school, and you are losing a segment of the class that is no longer participating. There's nothing political about this. And the crazy thing is that we have allowed some crazy polemicists to infuse politics into public health with devastating consequences. So that's my, and first I agree with you. The vast majority of colleges in any state lean heavily liberal, so that shouldn't be an issue. But when you try to ram this issue down, it's just crazy.
Dave, I'll give you a case in point just to prove your point of two of your things. One, how it shouldn't be political, and also how it has ramifications for everybody. So I heard this said, now this has to do with the infrastructure debate, but for some reason, it just hit me like a brick in terms of how effective this line is. And maybe if we look at it in an infrastructure context and we get away from the politics of the vaccine, maybe it will resonate more. And so I heard a politician say, a pothole on the road doesn't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican when you hit it with your car. And it was making the point, this should not be political. Infrastructure is going to help Republicans and Democrats. In fact, Joy and I have this. We have this thing. We love to go to restaurants and have either French onion soup or we also like to have lobster chowder or clam chowder. And so we were going to one of our favorite places to just go get French onion soup, and bam, Dave, it felt like some kind of like I went into a crater with my car. I don't know what was going on. I was on the freeway.
I remember that.
Yeah, you remember it because it blew my tire out, because of a darn pothole, I'm out like almost $150. So I was pissed off. Still am. So let me stop talking about it. So that's the one thing. This shouldn't be political. But now let's talk about how it impacts things. So in some ways, my worst fears happen. So since we've last talked, Joyce moved to Raleigh to attend North Carolina State University. She's in a single apartment that's expensive, but, wanted to give her that full experience. She sort of had her share of roommate drama. And this is my worst fear, Dave. She gets there, and they've already announced that one of her classes now is online for the fall, and another one possibly maybe.
Yeah.
And that's what's the thing. I'm like, look, you can stay home and do it remote and save, all the money for that single, nice apartment you're in, or you can go there and you get there, and because of the lack of herd immunity, because of holdouts, now it's impacting her education.
Absolutely.
Okay. And I like the way the president from I keep saying it wrong, Dave. Was it US Air, not United, right?
United Airlines. Yeah.
United. Yeah. So I heard one thing this 10 minutes before we go live. He said, if I have to make one more phone call to a family because they died over this thing, he was basically, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he was almost like, over my dead body, we'll impose a mandate before I have to go there again. In other words, there's consequences. And I heard another person say, don't think that all these people that are going to the hospital and taking up all these beds, don't think it has no impact on you. because of, what's the term, Dave? Hippocratic oath or something? Everybody, is that the term? Everybody gets served who walks in the hospital?
Yeah. First of all, people forget that during the COVID pandemic, none of the heart attacks, none of the strokes, people breaking their legs all had to wait in line because there were no beds to be found in the emergency department. So, yeah.
You would know, but you're there.
That's right.
Yeah, so now you're impacted with your heart attack, with your broken leg, and then you're also going to be impacted, I'm saying you as in you and me collectively, by the cost. The cost gets passed on to all of us. So I like you, Dave, I don't have a lot of patience for the view that this is my individual right. It's not your individual right for somebody else to maybe die and somebody else to maybe not be able to get taken care of because every bed's taken up at the hospital. So I'm going to say this. I respect schools, and there have been over 500 now that have implemented vaccine mandates for students.
Yeah.
I've heard 600, I've heard 500. So one of those two is right. It's growing every day. Here's what I predict. When you set the standard at the top, it will trickle down.
Yeah.
So I agree with what the professor of health at UC Berkeley said. They've been incredibly effective. And so I predict now that more and more companies are doing it, you'll see more and more people comply because you're establishing the standard of what you will accept and not accept. So I know it's a hot topic, but Dave and I both come down on pro-vaccine mandate. That's my final thought.
And my final thought is had a great segment on the benefits of masks. The fact is that with these masks, there was virtually no flu season. They are looking at studies now coming out of daycare centers that found that kids with masks had massive reductions in pink eye and colds and all the other ailments that affect kids because, of course, as you decrease COVID transmission, you're decreasing all other types of airborne diseases. So I'm not saying that masks aren't a pain and they're not inconvenient and all these things, but there are solid healthcare benefits to decreasing airborne transmission. So, there's good and bad in everything, but let's put a bow on this. I think we've talked it out, but the reality is this is not a political issue. It's being created as a political issue. It's a healthcare issue.
Very well said.
It's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Okay, friends, as promised, we gave you the countdown of the most generous gifts ever it's actually college history. I think I might have said U.S. college history last time. It's actually college history, so this does include some international gifts. And we did 15 through 8 last week, so we're closing out with the big 7. Ready for number 7, Lisa?
I am ready to hear number 7.
So you might recognize this name. In 2015, Phil Knight donated $500 million to Oregon Health and Science University to fund cancer research. Now, if you remembered, he gave $400 million to Stanford to crack the top 15 where he got his MBA in 62. So he cracks the list twice to 2 different schools. So he's making some money on those Nike shoes.
Absolutely.
Tied at number 7, Helen Diller, wife of real estate billionaire Sanford Diller, donated $500 million to the University of California at San Francisco. And the cool thing about that is this is a pretty recent gift. I think this is the most recent gift of any of all the gifts that we're talking about here. So this was in 2019, so 2 years ago. So that that's not a school with a big endowment. So that's transformational, getting $500 million. It's like Missouri S&T, Science and Technology. They got a $300 million gift, which didn't quite make the top 15, but that's like transformational for that school. And shout out to our listeners in Missouri who shared that with us. All right, keep it coming here. See if we'll have a bunch tied at number 7 with $500 million. Nope, we're dropping. After all those ones tied, we're dropping all the way down to... This don't have a heart attack over here.
Okay.
But number 7 again, Phil Knight. This time he gives $500 million to Oregon in 2016, the largest donation to a flagship school. So Phil Knight cracks the list 3 times, 3 different schools: Stanford, Oregon, which is, Nike's headquarters, right there. And then also Oregon Health and Science. So good. Congratulations. We going to have Phil Knight again?
Well, Phil Knight was a very generous man. That's all I have to say.
Absolutely. So now we're all the way to number 3, because you have a bunch of 777s when you're doing countdowns. That counts as 654. All right, number 3, Florence Irving donated $600 million in funds to Columbia and New York Presbyterian to fund cancer research on behalf of her and her husband Herbert. So $600 million from Florence Irving to Columbia. That happened in 2017 after her husband passed away. And Herbert Irving earned his wealth through founding the Global Frozen Foods, which later became Cisco. All right, tied at number 3. Intel co-founder Gordon Moore and his wife Betty donated $600 million over 10 years to California Institute of Technology in 2001. Once again, 2001 was a big year for philanthropy. 3 people gave the highest gift ever in history. At that time, it was the largest donation in educational history. The sum amounts to $866 million if it wasn't today's dollars. All right, for number 2, I'm going to butcher this name, but I'm going to try my best. Anil Agarwal, an Indian metals and mining magnate who has a net worth of $3.5 billion, donated $1 billion to fund research at the university in Odisha. In 2006, the donation marked the single largest gift to higher education, according to the Chronicle of Higher Ed. Today, the sum would be $1.2 million, adjusted for inflation. And no suspense here, because I gave it away in the big number. Michael Bloomberg, number 1, $1.8 billion, Johns Hopkins University. Bloomberg intended the gift toward making JHU need blind or admitting students regardless of their financial background. The gift is the largest donation in an individual American college, according to Inside Higher Ed. So there you have it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's really interesting because here in Chapel Hill, there's been a lot of controversy lately about a donation made by Walter Hussman to the journalism school. And one of the interesting things about it is somebody leaked his terms and how it divests over these different years and the school has to, hit these different metrics and do these different things. I kind of thought they just wrote a big check and that was the end of it, but that's not how this stuff goes. So it's fascinating to me to learn more about that.
Well, I don't know if I've mentioned this much before in the podcast, but I spent a year in fundraising. 2000, 2001 at the West End School, I was initially hired as director of annual giving. So I was really involved in this world, in this donor world. And one of the things about Mackenzie Scott, and I mentioned a couple of weeks ago on the podcast that while Bloomberg's gift is the biggest, she's given $2.7 million over the last 6 months. It's just to dozens of different institutions. Mm-hmm. But one of the thing about Mackenzie Scott's gift that has literally blown away so many institutions. She gave a lot of money to HBCUs, for example, and what they commented on over and over and over, if you read the press releases, is I can't believe it's unrestricted giving. There's no strings attached.
Right.
She literally would say, I've done my research. I've done my homework on you. Here's $40 million. I trust you. Use it the best way for your institution. And that's what institutions love.
I can only imagine. Yes.
Yeah. So awesome stuff. So somebody out there who's inspired by the philanthropy, do your thing and help somebody. You can make an impact for generations to come. All right, Lisa. It's bonus content time for our new listeners. Every 5 episodes, instead of taking a question from a listener, I kind of share something that's really on my heart that I want to talk about. And we decided to do a series that's going to extend to a 4-part series. Now, in fact, I was thinking, Lisa, you joined the podcast on 172. The only bonus content you ever know is these, because in 175 we did what you should do in the 9th and 10th grade. And then 180, no, how did we do that? what did we do?
Like we did before that, right?
Oh, no, that's right. That's right. We did the elementary and middle all together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we did elementary and middle all together in 175. If you've never heard that, what you should do if you have a child there. In 180, we did what you should do in the 9th and 10th. And now 185, Lisa and I talking about this and planning, we said we can't cover all of 11th and 12th. That's way too much. So what we're doing today, 11th grade only. And then that means 190, we'll pick up 12th grade. So there it is. And so I promise you we'll have some type of bonus content other than what your child should do in the grade that they're in. We're not going next to what your child should do if they're in college, although that would be interesting.
I think my daughter might need to hear that,
Yeah, maybe a listener will send that in as their question, and we'll sneak it in not through bonus content. Get the backdoor approach. All right. So one thing I want to say is there are a lot of things we could talk about, but it would be good things for you to do, right? So, for example, we could talk about how you should cultivate your spiritual life. We should talk about how you should focus on your friends. And this is the last time for you to see these friends before you go away. We could talk about how important it is to work out and eat healthy and on and on and on. And be respectful to your parent. We're not going to go there, even that obviously you should do all these things. It's going to be a very, very college process focused conversation. And we're just going to kind of stay in that lane. And doesn't mean that we don't think that other things are important. The other thing I want to say is we're defining 11th as soon as 10th ends. So rising 11th counts as 11th. In other words, encompassing your summer of your rising 11th grade year, that's gonna constitute this conversation as well and be part of the conversation. And a lot of places, like in the South, school ends in May. So assume this is starting in May. I know the North June is in some places late June. Some people are schools ending like June 29th. And then, other places it's ending like May 6th. There's a big difference depending on where you are in the country. Where was Illinois, by the way, on that?
I think school ended the 3rd week of May and started the 2nd week of August. Yeah. So it always end before Memorial Day.
Because I moved to Atlanta in 2009. I'd never heard of school ending in May. Any place I'd ever been, it ended in June. And that was the weirdest thing. Now it feels so totally normal to me because I'm going to my 13th year here. But now I'm like totally used to it. So we'll start out there. And what we're going to start out focusing on is really, really good things to do over the summer to take advantage of summer between, you're in your rising 11th grade year. Now, one thing I do want to say, don't beat yourself up if you're hearing some of these things, and you're thinking, I didn't do that. I didn't do that. Gee, I wish I did that. I wish I did that. Don't have any false guilt because almost all the things we're going to say that could be good to do over the summer, you can still do them. It's just that this might be an ideal scenario, and so what I do when I'm working with a student is I work backwards. And so I have a goal. And the goal is that in 12th grade, by Labor Day, students should have all of the following things completed. They should have their college list down. They should have their test scores down. And I mean down, you don't need to keep testing. Now, it doesn't always work this way. People pop in your lap at different times, especially on the private counseling side. In school, it's a pretty set calendar, but people sort of start working with you when they start working with you. But this is always the ideal. College list down, test scores down, personal statement done and completed. You've set foot on multiple colleges on their campuses, not necessarily all the ones you apply to, but you've at least set foot on, good 4 to 6 campuses at least you visited. Your recommendation writers have been selected and requested, and 90% of your applications have been completed. I used to say all your applications have been completed, but it never, ever worked out, Lisa. It was always like a school just got added in October because they came to my school, they did such an amazing presentation, and now I'm interested, or I changed my major, and now I'm interested. So now I've switched it because it's just kind of realistic to say 90%, not 100. So that's kind of the big goal I have when I'm working with someone. So then I want to break it down into bite-sized doses and work it backwards. And so, here's some really, really good things that you can do over the summer that can really help and take less pressure off you in the school year. So one of them is to decide if you're going to be a test submitter or non-submitter. That's a conversation I have all the time with students who the score is not their strength. Like, do they want to go through this process of putting all the time, effort, and energy into raising their test scores? Or would it be better just to completely build their college list off test optional schools? So that's one of the things you want to decide. Are you going to be a submitter or non-submitter? Most people will not, either they'll be a submitter or they won't prematurely want to rule out schools that are not test optional. So they'll usually want to go for it. But there are some, like I have a student I'm working with now as a 910 on the SAT as a rising senior. There's not a lot of opportunity for him to get that score up to a level that is sort of commensurate with his grades because he has pretty high grades. And so we've made the decision, like, he could bust his butt and spend a whole lot of time and maybe get 1,100, or we could just build his list off test optional schools. And there's so many of them now. But that's the decision that you need to make. So most of the time, the students I work with will decide, you know what, I don't want to rule out schools that require the test, so I'm going to go for it. So then the next thing is use the data to decide if you're going to be an ACT or an SAT test taker. And that's a big thing because a lot of people just assume that the most predominant test in their area is the test that they're going to take. So if Midwest applicants tend to gravitate toward the ACT, coastal applicants, East and West, tend to gravitate toward the SAT. I want people to use a data-driven approach. What does that mean? It means you take a full-length practice test of each test, and then you compare the scores, and then you go with the one you're better at, even if it's not the one you like the most. Okay, and so now I know there's these hybrid models out there. I used to administer them where they're like, 100 an hour 15, an hour 30 on one, and an hour 15, 30 on the other. I don't like those as much as the full length test. So take the full length test to determine if you're an ACT or an SAT. Now, that's just what I found is best. Now, if you decide you want to be a test submitter, now you got to figure out what's going to be your test pet plan. Are you going to be someone who's going to work on your own? A lot of people do that and do it incredibly effectively. Are you going to be somebody that's going to take a class? If you're going to take a class, is it going to be online? Is it going to be in person? Is it going to be like a smaller group, like 4 or 6 in the group? Is it going to be more like 15 or 20 in the group? Obviously, the less students, the more you pay, but the more individual personal attention. Or are you going to get private one-on-one? Is it in person? Is it Zoom? All that stuff needs to be figured out. Test prep calendar, targeting your dates knowing when the test is offered that you decide on. So anyway, that's enough about testing, but there's a lot of stuff that you can do about testing over the summer to get a head start on that. Next thing is get on some campuses when school is in session. And I like people to start out locally. I really don't like people jetting all over the country when they really don't know what they want yet. So I realize if you're in a more remote community, local for you might mean a 3 or 4 hour drive as opposed to a 20-minute drive. But take a look at as many different types of schools as you can that are convenient for you, where you really don't need airfare and you really shouldn't even need hotels. And you may choose to do a hotel here and there, but you really don't need to do it. So that's really kind of what I like to do. And there's a wide range, everything from Big State U, lots of rah-rah, to small liberal arts, to women's college, to technical institute if you're, have proclivities in those areas. I mean, there's just so many different types of colleges, HBCU, if you're considering that, HSI, Hispanic Serving Institution. There's just so many different types of schools. I don't want to go over the whole gamut of all of them here because that's going to give us a 3-hour podcast. But setting foot on a lot of different campuses is extremely helpful. I had a student that just, they answered my whole questionnaire, Lisa, and we were going to have our initial meeting, with my questionnaire. And then the mom reached out to me and she's like, Mark, we're about to spend a week visiting 6 schools. And she told me the 6 schools. She said, should we meet with you before or after? I'm like, after, please. Because I wanted that feedback. And so after those 6 schools, I said, create a bullet point list, what you liked and didn't like of all the schools. Student did that. And then it really gave me a real helpful insight into what was jiving with him when it came to the type of school. So that's extremely helpful because the sooner you can get your college list down, then a bunch of other things can kick in. I'll share a third point, and then I'll take a break and see what you want to comment on so far, Lisa. So this is a really important point: assessing what you can afford for college. I just took my KIP parents through a session last Monday on how to do that, figuring out exactly what you can afford. And there's a lot in that. We've done a podcast episode on that. You should be able to search for that and get it. But there's a long process involved in that. It involves a lot of things that people haven't thought of. But you want to use a systematic approach to come up with the amount that you can afford And then you want to have conversations with your child about that. You want to talk to your child. Do you expect them to work? If so, how much? How much do you expect them to contribute in the school year, in the summer? Are you expecting them to take out loans? If so, how much? And you want to create a budget, and you want to clearly communicate with your child as a rising junior, this is the maximum budget that we have. And everybody's pockets are different. For one family, it could be $10,000 a year. Another family, it could be unlimited when we can afford the price of any college. But whatever it is, for one other family, for that matter, it could be, stay at home and do community college, $3,000. I mean, it's not, the point isn't the amount. The point is that you go through the process, you get your number, you figure out who's doing what, and now you're looking with a budget in mind. So I'm tired of hearing my own voice. What do you want to say so far, Lisa?
Well, I guess, here's the thing. Like, this is a great list, but I think a lot of kids will have a difficult time completing it. And, I think there are some very high-powered kids who won't and who are extremely motivated. But a lot of kids that I have known don't want to think about college. It's kind of a block. They're anxious about it. They're scared. They're overwhelmed. And so they kind of put it off. And then there's a lot of conflict, right, between the parents and the kids about doing the things on this list. What are your thoughts, and what has been your experience in how to help kids kind of get through some of that and, start to pace themselves a little bit better?
It's a great question, and it's a reality. And there's no question that if you have a student that's zealous for college, all the stuff I'm talking about works really well. And this is something that's not age dependent. I mean, I have some middle school students, and I don't get carried away. I don't do heavy duty stuff with middle school students. I usually just meet with them once every 3 months. That's it, just to make sure they're doing all the right things. I'm not trying for them to be college obsessed in the 7th or 8th grade. But I have some middle school students I work with, and I just meet only with the student, and they're that zealous because they have that kind of buy-in, and they're so totally into this. Then you can also have a 11th or 12th grade that doesn't know if they want to go to college. So a lot of it is going to depend on what the level of alacrity is on the part of the student. My other thought is there's a reason why the saying familiarity breeds contempt, became part of our parlance. It's because it's true. And people tune off their parents. They just do. They're tired of that voice. And there's built-in tension in the college process between the parent and the student. And this is kind of how it goes. A parent sees that their child has unbelievable opportunities in front of them, and they do not want them to miss out. So they feel like in order to avoid them missing out, they need to move into sort of, for lack of a better word, nagging. And so the kid is like, I'm not 13 anymore. Stop telling me what to do. Or the kid is like, college. I'm sick of it. I get it here. I get it there. Can we talk about something other than that? So there's a natural tension. And, I indicated in the last session, Lisa, that in my opinion, it is in the interest of the overwhelming majority of people to work with someone to guide them through this process and for it not to be parent driven. And it doesn't have to be something extremely expensive. I know this sounds counterintuitive, but I feel the people I am able to help the most are the people who need money, scholarships, or gift aid in order to afford college. In fact, Lisa, why don't you mention, I don't think we've ever mentioned this on the podcast, why don't you mention some of the work that you do to help people with the college process that don't have a lot of resources?
Well, right now I'm volunteering as a college coach for Scholar Match, which is a nonprofit organization that reaches out to high-achieving first-generation low-income students. And, they get assigned a college coach. And then as volunteers, we take them through the process. So right now I'm working with 2 students, and they're both fantastic. But one student I just started working with who lives in a small town in the upper Midwest. And she told me this week I would be so lost. I had no idea about any of these things. No one in my family knew to tell me these things. I'd be so lost without this help. And I think that just having a person who is not your mom, not your dad, who's kind of, can shortcut you through some of the process is really helpful, for these kids and probably for all kids.
Yeah. And I know, Lisa, you did that last year. You worked with several kids as well. And so I wanted you to mention that because I don't want someone to think I don't have any resources. How could I work with a college coach? There are also private independent college coaches that work at a prorated amount for people that struggle, that don't struggle financially, but they still need the services. And so I'm really a big believer in having, in general, I'm an outsourcer, right? I believe in letting pros do what pros do best. So I'm not the person that's going to try to get on the hood and fix my car. I'm going to get the person who's really good at it. I am. I believe in outsourcing, letting pros do what pros do best. And so a lot of times somebody would be very well served by either hiring a college coach or using a CBO, a community-based organization. And I don't want someone to think, well, that's only for rich people. No, there's a lot of stuff out there that's very affordable that can work within your budget. And this oftentimes will help a lot because now you're getting away from the parent-child dynamic. And you're working with someone that's used to working with kids and all of their, idiosyncrasies. So I think those two things, like not having the parent be the primary person. And don't get me wrong, there's certainly times parents do it and parents can do it well. And especially some of our listeners who listen to every single thing and take all this information and they're involved in other sources like this to get as much information. There's certainly people that can get really, really good results doing it on their own. But I would also argue you don't know what you might have got if you worked with a professional. Like you might think, okay, it worked out really well. My kid got in this school and they're happy, but you might not have known what merit scholarship or what opportunities you might have gotten. So that's one thing. And I'm not trying to say that an outside coach is the answer or a CBO or free services is a panacea to everything, but it will help a lot to remove the parent and not have that friction the last couple of years in the home. I don't know. Did I answer your question or not, Lisa?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that, I guess the only other follow-up question I would have is some kids aren't going to participate with anybody. And I don't know what we can do about that except hope that they, mature a little bit, maybe resolve some of their feelings about it and get motivated, at some point. But I've seen kids like that who just refuse to think about it, refuse to engage with anyone about it.
Yeah, and the other thing, and I'm really glad you brought this point up because it's a great question, is that different people are ready for different things at different times, right? So this timeline I'm laying out kind of assumes that the student has interest at this time in their life. And if you have a child who they're not even sure if they want to go to college, then this may be too early for them to do some of these things. On the other hand, I have worked with some of those students who getting them on a college campus sometimes can be what inspires them.
Right, absolutely.
That can be, very inspirational for them to see, like, the opportunities. And, my experience is that students have a tendency to look at college partly through the prism of high school. And this kind of like school is school. But once they get a sense of like how much more freedom you have, how much more flexibility, how many more clubs, how many more courses, how many more choices of people, how many more decisions you get to make yourself, that in of itself can inspire them. Another critical point I would be remiss to not mention here, and for some people, this is going to seem sacrilegious, but this is what I believe. College is not for everyone, especially four-year college, especially four-year residential college. Some people are more interested and more motivated to be a welder, a plumber, an electrician, a mechanic, to join the military, or to be an entrepreneur who learns by watching YouTube videos or listens to podcasts or seminars. I believe learning is absolutely essential, and everybody should be committed to an education, but not necessarily a four-year college or four-year residential college. I believe there are more ways to be educated than to attend a four-year residential college. I also believe some people would be well served by taking a gap year, gaining more maturity, gaining more self-awareness, and gaining more self-direction. So those are just some thoughts. I'm not saying it will reach everybody, but hopefully it will reach some people. The next thing is, building this quality college list and doing copious research. Now, this is really, really important because the way that I like to phrase it to my students is once we know the list, then we can talk about the strategy, right? If it's a school that's just going to look at test scores, grades, and curriculum, then we don't need to focus that much on essays and our recommendations on extracurriculars because that's not going to matter. And that's just a simplification. I could go into a lot more detail, but there's some things like, for example, we'll use one example. There's schools that love resumes and there's some that hate them. So once I know the list, then we'll know whether or not, how much emphasis to put on the resume. I still like students to put something like that together anyway to give to the recommenders, but we'll put more emphasis on it if it's a school that wants the resume uploaded as part of the application. So once you get the list, it really impacts so many things. It impacts what we're going to emphasize, what you're going to emphasize. Even that I recommend working with a college coach, I'm not assuming that most of our listeners are. So I'm trying to approach this from the standpoint that you won't be doing it. And here are the things that you can do on your own. So here's one of the things that are so important about the college list. Once you get the college list, then you can map out like where are some places that we may want to visit and not waste a lot of time. Especially if you're talking about going beyond like your local area now and actually doing visits. Without the research, you can waste a lot of money and time on airfare, hotels, meals, and rent a car. You can waste a lot of money and a lot of time. So the research allows you to not spend all this money and time doing that, only to get to a place and it's like meh, or worse than that, this place is disgusting. So the research will allow that to be very, very, very efficient, and you'll save a lot of money and time there. It also can allow you to put together a cluster of schools in a region and say, oh, well, you know what? This makes sense for me to visit because there are like 3 schools in this area and they're all close. We can do them all within 2 days. So that's a really great use of your summer. Another really great use of your summer is continue to cultivate your extracurriculars. That's really something you can continue to do in lots of different ways. You can do research on college majors or careers that you may be considering. That's a really good thing to do. And then, make sure you have some fun. I know I said we're not going to talk about stuff like, staying in shape and fitness and all that, but I do want to say that. I feel like I would be remiss to not say, balance that with some fun. And I have the psychologist here too. She might pounce on me for not talking about emotional well-being.
Yeah, because when you look at a list like this, and I think your list is great, but when I look at a list like this, I think, geez, no wonder kids are anxious and depressed. Because if someone told me I had to do this summer, I would be anxious and depressed for sure. And it's just a lot of pressure for kids, and it somehow gets all crammed into like a year and a half.
It is. And I'm glad you brought that up. And it is important to have some fun. So if your thing is going roller skating, go roller skating. If it's going to the movies, go to the movies. If it's, mountain climbing or biking or, hiking or whatever your thing is, do it. But I do want to come back to that pressure thing. Like, I am making an assumption that there's a student that wants to get started with this process. And their motivation is there, and they just want some guidance on what to do.
Absolutely.
So that's a big assumption. And so if we're not talking about that, it's very different, right? Whether they could be overwhelmed by all of these things. So that's sort of a big assumption I'm making. And like I said, if you're not there, then just change the timeline on all this. You don't have to do it at this time. Now, there's a bunch of optional things that you could do, and sometimes they make sense. They're not things I would say you should do, but they're great things to do. They're things that for one kid, they'll make perfect sense. For another kid, they won't. Some of those would be things like work, have a job, take an online class, go to a residential camp, and that could be anything from an arts camp, athletic camp, academic camps, volunteerism, international travel. So those are all things that may make sense to do. That's just going to depend on each individual person. They're not something that I would say you need to do, but they're all great things to do if they work for you. And I do want to just quickly mention something about athletes here. I'm not going to go into this, but if you're looking to be recruited as an athlete and play varsity, there are a few things I would really want to be working on now because the whole athletic process has moved up a lot sooner for recruited athletes. One, you're going to want to have some great video, especially if you're playing a team sport like a volleyball, a soccer, or lacrosse, basketball, football, rather than a time sport like a swimming or track. That's really, really going to be important. You're going to want to be able to get an accurate assessment at the level that you can play at. That's one of the best things you can do if you can figure that out. And that's one of the hardest things to do. I recommend NCSA. I have a partnership with them. They work with all of my student athletes. Automatically, it's included for them. It's a new partnership, but I'm really excited about it. I personally worked with NCSA for my own daughter, Joy, when she was going through the process. They just provide an incredible platform to connect students with coaches. So I recommend that. And then the last thing I would say is take the initiative to reach out to colleges. That's really important that you take the initiative to reach out to coaches and express your interest in them. By the way, this athletic piece is so complicated that we're going to have 2 different interviews either in late 2021 or in 2022 related to athletics. I'm having one of the top people at NCSA come on. He's fantastic. He does all of their Facebook Facebook Lives. and his name's Danny. He's amazing. He's going to come on and do an interview. And what I want to do with that is have listeners send in all their questions about athletic recruitment. And I think that's going to be a great interview, and we'll ask him that. And then also Trinity College's dean, we're gonna have him on, as well as the athletic director, to talk about what they do for recruiting. So if you want to have a whole bunch more in athletic recruiting, just stay tuned for a couple interviews that we'll have. And over the course, I haven't decided yet if it will be one in 2021 or one in 2022 or both in 2022. I'm going to take a break. Anything you want to say so far, Lisa?
No, I think those are all great things to do. And of course, they can help kids decide what they want to do. If you do shadow a dentist and you realize you hate dentistry, that's an incredibly important thing to find out when you're, going into your junior year. So you can kind of figure out what else, or you can find you have a passion for something. So I love it when kids they try new things, they experiment and use their summers to really kind of refine who they are and what they like.
Yeah, and that falls in that whole piece of figuring out your major, shadowing. One of the first students I ever worked with in Pennsylvania back in 2000, she thought she wanted to be a dentist since she was 6, and she did a 3-week shadow volunteer internship, unpaid internship over the summer, and she hated it, absolutely hated it. And she's a psychologist now, by the way, Lisa.
Well, there you go. It's the opposite of dentistry, really.
Yeah. So there you go. But she was so happy that she figured that out. So those are things that are great to do in the summer. Now, let's talk about the school year. Let's say you missed that window. You're 12th grader, you're hearing this stuff, or you're 11th grader, and you're listening to this, and it's like January, it's much later, or you are rising 11th and you did some of those things, but you can't get them all done. So first of all those things that we said they're all things you can do in the school year. It's just that there are a lot of advantages if you can get ahead. So if you can get ahead on your college research, it can really inform, where you visit. If you can get ahead on your college budget and you can figure out your budget, we're going to pay $25,000 for college. That's it. You're going to pay $7,000. We're going to pay $18,000. Now you can look in with budget in mind, and you can stop falling in love with schools you can't afford. So there's a lot of advantages doing early, but if you're just hearing this later, then you do it later. That's no big deal. All right. So in the school year, as I said, you can basically do all of those things that we already talked about there. But there's some unique things that you can do in the school year. One of them is start to think about who my college recommenders are going to be. For a lot of reasons, the junior year is really the best year to have recommenders. So if you're in a class and you're in whatever, doesn't matter what it is, physics, let's just say you're in physics and you're in U.S. history, and you think, I want these two to be my recommenders, then it's in your best interest to really get to know those teachers and let them get to know you. Scheduling time with them, going to office hours with them. That's going to give them a fuller picture of who you are. And so starting to think through who your recommenders are, that's definitely one of the things that you can do in the junior year. You can also start to familiarize yourself with the applications that from the colleges, if you've got your college list, understanding they may change, but they usually don't change that much. And then you can actually start to plan some real visits to schools that you're actually going to apply to. And this is where parents can come in and help with all the logistics. You can also start to build relationships with the reps at these schools, making sure that you go to fairs when they're in the area, or if they're speaking at like a local hotel in a lobby, or attending their visit, taking advantage of all their online visit programs, which have grown so much these days. You can start doing all of that stuff. And then later, when you get into the back half of your junior year, you can complete your personal statement, and you can start to at least do outlines for things like your personal insight questions if you're looking at the UCs, and start putting at least a little outline together. You don't have to flesh it out yet, just in case there's some slight changes that come out, but you can at least put an outline together. And then you can keep working on your test scores. Doing lots of practice tests. There's a student I started working with recently, Lisa, and the older child is at Harvard, and the mom worked with that older child completely, 100%. They didn't use any outside person at all for their testing. But what did they do? Practice tests all the time. Practice tests, going back in and analyzing them, looking at making corrections, practice tests. And now I'm working with the second child, and every Saturday between now and the up and coming SATs, Saturday morning, he takes a practice test. That's just what their family does. And I've seen that be extremely helpful. So you can keep doing practice tests over the years. It can be, practice tests and going back and looking at them. You can continue to develop your extracurriculars throughout the school year, especially trying to get into more leadership opportunities. And then you can start making plans for your summer of your rising senior year, especially if you're going to be doing something like, a camp or an overseas travel or one of these things that you just kind of can't do at the last minute. You can start making plans. So those are my thoughts on the junior year. And I think you see why we couldn't do 11th and 12th in one episode.
Too much to do. Anything
else you want to throw in? I do want to come back to the point that you made, which is kids are under a lot of pressure. And don't freak out if you don't get to all this, or if you don't feel ready to get to all this, because you just don't have the motivation right now. Don't beat yourself up. But anything else besides that? I thought that was a great point you made.
Well, one of the things that I noticed that my daughter complained about the college process is there's sort of like a competition among the kids, based on status or what they perceive to be a cool school and a not cool school. And she actually wrote an article for her blog on this for a journalist, and it was really good. And she, kind of nailed this. But, I think if you can try to let go of that, try to let go of, what anybody else thinks. This is probably true for all of us adults too. And just try to think about what makes you happy and what you like to do and what kind of situations you like to be in. And if you can get rid of some of the anxiety about failure or competition, then it's more fun. It's not something you're trying to beat somebody else out or hold on to your self-image. It's an exploration of who you are. And that can be a lot of fun and very exciting.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. That's a really important point. That's really one of the things you can do. And this also applies to parents too. I usually encourage people to not be sharing all the time with everybody in your peer group, like where your kid's applying. Like that's not really, quite honestly, not their business. But being careful with who you surround yourself with also. Now that's easier said than done, because your friends are your friends. Like you're not going to drop a friend because they're obsessed with trying to go to brand name university. You're not going to say, okay, I'm not going to be your friend anymore. But just being a little careful about that. But you're right. Make this a process of an exploration of who you are and not a quest for status. That's it's not a to-do, it's a mentality, but it's maybe the most important thing we've said of everything.
Yes.
So let's close with that. Good stuff.
Right.
That's why you're here.
Oh, thank you.
Awesome. We'll see you in 5 weeks to do up the 12th grade.
All right. Yeah, you can imagine there's a lot to do then too. So.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, hopefully you heard Kristen Mosley in my interview with her last week. I know a lot of you have sent in and asked us, could we do something on outside scholarships? And so in part 2, she continues and she shares some of the other scholarships that she won. And she shares why she feels she won these scholarships. We talk about looking at other high schools and their scholarships. We talk about whether Kristen used books and websites in her search. We talk about workplace scholarships. We talk about deadlines. We talk about the importance of recommenders. We talk about how many scholarships should you apply to? How many did Kristen apply to? We talk about whether it's helpful to have an accountability partner in your scholarship search. And finally, we talk about what Kristen is doing to win scholarships now that she is a student enrolled in college at Spelman. Are scholarships only for high school students, or are there ones out there for college students? Listen and enjoy. Did you look at any other schools? Like, I oftentimes tell people look at other local schools as well. Like I know in our area, Marietta High School's got a really nice list on their website. Do you know if you looked at any others, or did you stay focused on just the ones that came from your school?
So I did have ones from my school, but then I also looked at other ones like North Springs, Westlake, if I could, Banneker, Tri-Cities. I looked at all of the scholarships that I thought would be relevant. So me going to school in Sandy Springs and then me living in South Fulton. So looking at all the schools in both of those areas.
let me stop for a sec, Kristen, because you don't know this, but we have listeners in 94 countries and 50 states. You know, in fact, we have 3 times as many listeners in California as anywhere. So these names that Kristen's rattling off are all other high schools that are typically within 15 miles of her home, if not, close to her school. So they're just high schools in Metro Atlanta. And so what was your experience like looking at other websites from other schools? Did you identify any ones that were good on there? Were you disappointed? Did you apply to any? Tell us about that experience.
So I think when I really started to recognize that looking at other high schools lists would be beneficial, it was sort of late in the game. I want to say it was almost around December or January, and that's when a lot of the applications are due. So I think that I found a lot of good scholarships. It was just that the deadlines had passed. So that's why when people emphasize really starting the end of junior year and making sure that you're looking, really do that, because I wish that I had started earlier. That way I could have taken more advantage of all of those other scholarships that I found.
So let's talk about workplace scholarships. I define a workplace scholarship as a place that you've worked before, and it could be, a Kroger, McDonald's, Dairy Queen, or it could be a place where parents worked. Did you look at scholarships at any of those places? Because that's oftentimes a place where they'll give priority to somebody who's had a job affiliation.
So I did look. And so I spent my first 2 years of high school, or last 2 years of high school, working at Kumon. Unfortunately, they don't offer a scholarship. I wish they did, though, because they're all about education. Mm-hmm. And then my dad is a retired sheriff and currently works at Delta. And so they didn't have any scholarships. Delta did, but I think that deadline had passed. And then my mom works for the Fulton County Board of Education. And unfortunately, the Board of Education doesn't offer any scholarships. So that was not necessarily the strongest place that I had when I was looking for scholarships, but it was definitely a place that I looked.
Yeah, and one thing I think that you're saying loud and clear, and you're even admitting on your own that this is one area where you might have been able to do better, was deadlines. Deadlines. They're extremely important. And you can talk to any scholarship committee, and one of the first places they're going to phase out somebody right away is if they miss the deadline.
Yes.
That's the first line of cut. And so it sounds like what I'm hearing you say, Kristen, is I found some good ones, but I had missed the deadline when I found them.
Yes, and I'm a pretty bad procrastinator. I don't know if you know that, Mr. Stucker, but it definitely doesn't help, especially when you're in your senior year of high school and you have all of your college applications coming up and you have tests for school. It just becomes a lot at the time. So procrastinating definitely doesn't help. So to all the listeners, try not to procrastinate. Try to get it done as soon as you find them.
That's good advice for not only students, but parents as well. I was listening I was actually watching TV, and some journalists were talking about, if we don't have a deadline, we need those deadlines to make submissions for our articles. So unfortunately, the procrastination habit doesn't only inflict students. That accountability helps us adults as well. So let's talk about scholarships. Like, there's diversity scholarships out there that are targeted toward Black females or people attending HBCUs, like United Negro College Fund. And then there's also scholarships like a lot of colleges will have like an local alumni chapter that will give scholarships away. Did you look at any of those kinds of scholarships?
I did. So one of the big ones was UNCF and the Thurgood Marshall College Fund Foundation. And those scholarships, I think because those were really big, I also had a little trouble getting those. I think that sort of went back to making sure that my essays were strong enough. I feel like I had really good recommenders. So I think that it was really my essays that caused me to lose out on some of those. And so that's why now I'm once again taking advantage of all of those writing center or having other people look at my essays just to make sure that those are very strong.
Yeah, no, let's talk about recommenders, because one thing, you don't want to keep going back to the same person and ask them to do, 10 or 15 or 20 recommendations for you. So how did you handle that? Did you have people have a standard recommendation that they would send to, all the different people? Did you line up different people? I've seen different things done. I've seen people, put them in sealed envelopes and the student sends them off. Nowadays, everything's online. So there's most of them are involved getting a link and doing an upload. I mean, how did you sort of handle that, even in terms of expectation setting? Like, did you go to your recommenders and say, I'm going to be applying to quite a few, so do you mind doing this for me for multiple ones? Or just talk to me and, talk to us and how you sort of handled getting recommendations and not, having to have one or two superstar recommenders have to write from scratch like 15 recommendations for you.
Yes. So it was a little bit of all of what you just said. I definitely had different recommenders for different things. So for one of my scholarships, I reached out to he was my AP government teacher in 9th grade and also the student government advisor. So he knew me both in a leadership capacity and academic. And so whenever there was something regarding leadership, I always reached out. Hi, Mr. Kadish, do you mind writing me a scholarship? And so most of the time that scholarship was able to be used for multiple scholarships. And all he really had to do was go in and change the name. Another recommender that I had was my math center teacher. And so she knew me both in a capacity regarding like how passionate I was about math and then my leadership ability in the classroom. So whenever it came to community service and leadership and academics, then she was a recommender that I would use. And so those were two of the big ones that I used when it came to the scholarship process. And so I just let them know, hi, Miss Taylor, do you mind sending me the recommendation? And so she just sent it over to me. And so now all I do is change out the name of the scholarship and send those off.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said you did a little bit of everything, because you'll find different things. Sometimes they want them coming directly from the recommender, either by a link or sealed envelope, and sometimes you can use the process that you used. But it's definitely best. You want to use your best recommender, so it's best to sort of do some expectation setting that maybe applying to quite a few of them, so that it's not, and I usually recommend that if they can try to write a standard one, rather than, I think it's a lot to expect somebody to change their recommendation and customize it to every single scholarship that you apply to.
Mm-hmm. And so that's why I just sort of have them focus on talking about my leadership ability and then community service. That way, if it's a leadership or community service, I already know that that's the scholarship or the recommendation that I could use for that scholarship.
So how many scholarships in total do you feel you applied to, Kristen? Like everything from all the ones you did online to the school-based ones to, all the ones we're talking about here.
From high school until the end of college?
Well, you're not at the end of college yet, unless you're on the super accelerated plan and you haven't told me something.
No.
I know you're smart, but you're not that smart.
Yeah, no.
I'm only joking.
Let's see, maybe about 55.
So that's good, because I normally tell students, you got to do 50 if you really want to make some serious, you really want to do this. And look at you, you did 50 and you won over $25,000.
Yes. And so I think, and it's hard because during this first semester of college, I sort of started slacking. And now that I have all this time off, I'm able to get back to it. And really my goal has been 3 scholarships a week.
Good goal.
I started out with 5, but then I realized, Kristen, that's a lot of essays that you have to write.
No, that's a lot, Kristen, because I usually tell people 1 or 2 a week is like a good goal.
Because you have to have time to really think about your essay and then have it workshopped and all of that. And just 5 essays wasn't realistic. So that's why I went down to 3.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, you want to know the next interview after Kristen Mosley? Well, it's with Eric Furda, who spent over a decade at Columbia in admissions, including as executive director for undergraduate admissions for a decade. And he spent over another decade as dean of undergraduate admissions at his alma mater, the University of Pennsylvania. Eric and I just recorded the interview, and friends, you're in for a treat. Now, Eric also has a show on SiriusXM entitled The Process. It is another place for you to ask your questions about admissions. But rather than me saying any more, our recommended resource for episode 185 is the SiriusXM show, The Process. And here is Eric describing the show in his own words.
So, Mark, this is really an amazing opportunity. So really, thank you for having me. I'd like to talk a little bit about The Process, which is a radio show on Stars, SiriusXM Stars 109. Great opportunity to have a conversation with the Dean of College Counseling from the Dwight Englewood School, Eileen Cunningham-Fikens. Mark, I think we're hitting with we're over our 60th show right now.
Nice.
And we are monthly. And we are taped. We used to be live, but it is taped. But we want to have conversations with our listeners so they can call throughout the month and ask us questions. 866-993-8267. That's 866-993-8267. Leave a voicemail for Eileen and myself, and you'll hear your voice on SiriusXM Stars 109, and we'll answer your questions about the college admissions process.
Oh, that's awesome, because, we have a question for a listener segment. And now you gave people another avenue for, because sometimes with our questions, we get backed up and I'm like 15 weeks in backlog. And so, you got another place to get your questions answered from a star and a pro. So thanks, Eric. Can't wait to tune in. And the times again when it's on?
We air monthly, and the new segments are the last weekend of each month. And then that show will go throughout the month. So usually the last Sunday of each month. So leave your questions throughout the month.
And that's our recommended resource for this week.
Now, do you find they get easier as the more you do? Because, hey, I've already kind of done that essay. I can just sort of tweak it a little bit.
Yes. So I definitely saved all of my scholarship essays under one document. That way, whenever I found one that was, I've sort of written this already, just go ahead and tweak a few words, a few sentences here and there to make it better fit that scholarship. That was definitely something that I did. It makes it easier when you're applying for a lot of scholarships.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because I think when you throw a number out like 50, it's like, it's like intimidates people,
Right. 55 different scholarships.
Yes. No, I know this because I'll tell people that and I'll just see their body reaction. They're flinching. I feel like I said, and you're going to need to run 5 marathons,
Mm-hmm.
And then they just quit before they start. And so it's very helpful for people to know that they get a lot easier as you've written most of the essays that come up over and over, and then you can just kind of tweak them, as well. So that's really good. Now, did you use any scholarship books? I know that I had recommended to you the Ultimate Scholarship Guide. I'm not sure if you ever used it or not.
Yes.
But did you use that or any other books?
I did. And I think that was the only book that I used. I used a lot of websites just because
that was
more convenient in terms of looking for scholarships. But I definitely used the book.
I was going to ask you that. I was going to ask you about websites as well. So between like that book or websites, did you find that helpful, not helpful? What was your experience with that?
I would say they were helpful. That was still during a time when I needed to better write my essays and just better cater my scholarship packet towards the scholarship committee. So I think that if I had known what I know now, then I would have done a lot better on those kinds of scholarships.
So let's talk about that. What do you know now that you didn't know then?
Take advantage of all of your resources. So that writing center, going in with the perspective of who is looking at my application, like looking at their mission statements, better researching the scholarship committees to see what exactly they're looking for in a candidate, and really catering towards who they are. So like the AKA scholarship, their big thing is community service. So that was what I talked about in my essay. Me not only being like passionate about teaching, but the volunteering that went along with me teaching and my passion.
Now, you said something in there that's really important, and I really hope our listeners didn't miss it. So it's really important that you learn how to look at a scholarship and assess what they're actually looking for. Do research on the organization, research on the scholarship committee. And then it's also really important that you self-assess. So do you feel you got better at self-assessing whether or not you line up with certain scholarships? Because some of them may be targeting someone that's got really low income and you may not qualify for that, or some other aspect of some talent or skill or something that they're looking for. And, if you discern, well, that's kind of not who I am. I'm, they may want maybe engineering, or there's all kinds of different things I could say. Did you feel your skills at self-assessing whether you were aligned and matched with what the scholarship was offering? Did you feel those improved over time?
Oh, most definitely. I remember this was fall of senior year, and I was applying to a scholarship that was for math majors, but it was regarding engineering. And so I was like, oh, I'm a math. So why not apply to this one? And so what I talked about in my essay was education and teaching. And I'm pretty sure that's not what they were looking for. They're an energy-based engineering program. So recognizing, that may not have been the best scholarship for me to apply to or put my energy in.
Great example. That's perfect. That's exactly what I was hoping you would say. I didn't plant that question. This is all natural. This is just Kristen doing her thing. So Kristen, another thing that I emphasized, is one, setting a goal, how many you're going to do. Another is having an accountability partner. And I don't know if I emphasize that as much with you, because I probably was like, oh, Kristen, she's so self-motivated, she'll be fine. But I really emphasize that now with everybody. Get an accountability partner. Sometimes it can be a parent. Sometimes it can be another super highly motivated student. But it's got to be somebody that's going to push you and say, Kristen, you said you were doing 2 scholarships a week. Like we agreed we'd share them with each other. I haven't seen your 2 this week. Did you have anybody like that at all? Or were you just completely on your own to do this?
I would say sort of a little bit of both. My dad was a major pusher in, Kristen, keep applying to scholarships. How many have you applied to this week? He didn't necessarily know my goal, but he wanted me to keep applying to scholarships to the point where, Kristen, you should be getting a refund check. That hasn't happened yet, and I'm hoping that I can get there by the end of next semester. But, and then I think it's also when it comes to my friends, like a lot of us were applying to some of the same scholarships. So it'd be like, check in. Oh, did you get your recommenders? Did you finish your essay? I wish that we sort of did a better job of holding each other accountable. And I think it's just because of the competitive nature of scholarships and thinking, oh, if I help her with this, is she going to be the one who gets it over me? So sometimes that can be a conflict of interest, but I think just really having a strong community just to check in on each other, finding at least one person is really important to any scholarship journey.
Well, and it can definitely help with that procrastination, which most people have that bug, and because I always tell people with school, there's so many built-in forms of accountability, whether it's grades or attendance or essays or papers, or parent-teacher conferences, and so many things. But with scholarships, you don't do it. There's no consequence other than to your financial bottom line,
which you find out at the end of the semester. So, yes. Now, I know you also looked at some institutional scholarships. I know that's not the subject of this interview, but I just want to underscore that because I never want students to neglect the institutional scholarships from the college themselves while they pursue private outside. And I know we won't get into that, but I know from working with Kristen that she did look into Spelman scholarships as well that Spelman offers. Yes.
So, Kristen, what I want to talk about now, and it's something that I'm really glad that you've already really brought it up and alluded to it already in our conversation, and that is you can still get these scholarships in college. You mentioned I need to get on it now and use my free time. And that's a myth that a lot of people have out there that, they're only for high school seniors, and so I kind of missed that window. So I guess, I'm screwed, so why don't you talk a little bit about what you're doing now to identify scholarships that you can apply to as a college student?
This is an interesting question, or just something to talk about, because I remember when I was in high school, I feel like, a lot of these scholarships are for college students. And now that I'm in college, it's like, oh, wow, a lot of these scholarships are for high school students. So that's been a weird transition. But I definitely can say that there are scholarships out there. It's just finding out where to look, and reaching out to your financial aid advisor is an important thing. So I've sent mine emails just to sort of let her know who I am, what I'm passionate about, what I plan to do, what I'm majoring in. That way she has an idea of who I am as a student. And then if she comes across any scholarships that she thinks might relate to who I am and what I'm doing, then that she can reach out to me. And so there's definitely opportunities. One thing that I can say, though, is that being a freshman is a really weird transition, because now I'm at the point where a lot of the scholarships seem to be for college sophomores, I guess, because they think that you're more firm in what you want to do. And so it's been a little bit harder this semester finding scholarships, but they're definitely out there, and I've definitely achieving my 3-a-week goal.
Yeah, and as soon as you get off of remote learning, your financial aid officer, that's your new BFF. She needs to know not just your email. She needs to know your face. Like, squeaky wheel gets the grease. Not in a whining sense, but just in a pleasant, likable sense. But when they see you, then you're on their mind, and they can, and it'll make them think about things. They know where the money is. A lot of times they'll know different sources of money. What have you heard from Spelman when you've communicated with her? Have she at least directed you to like an online, scholarship tool that Spelman offers, or sometimes they have, little online scholarship boards within the school or other sources of money?
Yes. So first she always directs people or me at least, to the Spelman Scholarship website. And
That's
has
what I
all
was
the
trying to say, but I was fumbling over it.
Don't worry.
An online board. I was trying to say that.
And so a few of those are a little outdated. Probably need to go back and update those. But there were a few that I could find on there. And then, of course, the big one, UNCF.
Mm-hmm.
I wish that Spelman was a part of Thurgood because those are a lot of good scholarships. So those are usually the places that she's directed me. There haven't been any local scholarships per se that she's told me about, but definitely just keep reaching out until we can find something or at least until I can get some more money.
Yeah, and you want to look at department scholarships too. Individual departments, there's scholarships that oftentimes are targeted to current college students for people majoring in education. So I don't know if you've looked into that, but specific scholarship for education majors. I know this particularly about Spelman. Spelman has some scholarships for returning students that got really good GPAs at Spelman. So you should talk to your advisor about that. Like, once you go in there and prove yourself and handle your business, they have a way of coming up and finding money for you.
And that's what I plan to do once I get my official first year transcript back.
Yeah.
Next week in the news, Education Department delays rollout of the simplified FAFSA, an article by Daniel Douglas Gabriel in the Washington Post. Our question from a listener is, my rising senior spent 100% of his junior year online and got 2 B+ because assignments were inadvertently turned in late. Will colleges take the whole nature of his junior year and the disruptions due to COVID, which caused these late filings, into consideration? And our interview is part 3 of 3, the final part, with Kristen Mosley, a student who won 10 outside scholarships, telling us how she did it.
All right, friends. See you next week.
Yeah, take care.
And sign up for the Apple Ruth Testing and Tutoring SAT, ACT. Once again, your collegeboundkid.com. Hit the resource section. Sign up. It'll be well worth your time.
That's right, because remember, just because it's test optional doesn't mean that tests aren't important.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please subscribe so you get every episode as soon as it is released. If you are interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on your favorite podcast listening app. I am the producer of the Your College Bound Kid podcast. We have a fantastic team of 9 people. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. David Williams and Dr. Lisa Ruff. Our sound engineer who fixes all of our many errors is Nemanja Motvich. The amazing music you hear is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Dalianas Dimitri. If you want to have a college coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want to ask, or a college you want Lisa or me to do a spotlight on, or if you have a recommended resource or an article you think we should share, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you, our family, next week.